The question is the proposed expenditure of a communication portfolio be agreed to. I call the member for Longman.
Thank you so much, Brett. And to appease the political chest beating of those members opposite, I will be very succinct in my questioning because I'm very interested in the answer. Minister, as you know, they might
order.
this is a genuine policy question that affects my electorate, and I know they want to beat their chest politically, but let's just listen to a genuine policy question.
Address your question through the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Minister, as you know, I do have a semi-rural electorate, and mobile coverage has been a very significant issue in that electorate for a very long time. And many people struggle with black spots around parts of my electorate. Now, I know the government took a very significant policy to rectify mobile black spots across the country to the last election, and I was wondering if you could update us on where that's at, what community feedback you've been seeking, what engagement you've had with the mobile network operators like Telstra and Optus, and particularly if you could give us some timelines on the rollout of potential funding and when we might know a bit more about what I think is a great policy.
Call the Minister.
Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, I'd ask the Parliamentary Secretary, the member for Bradfield, to respond to that, as he's had the carriage of the mobile black spots program in our portfolio.
That is in order. That's in order. I call the Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to thank the member for Longman for raising a very important topic. When the Abbott government came to power, we looked at the question of mobile coverage, and we went back and looked at the previous government's budgets. We looked at the 2008 2008-9 budget, and we found that not $1 had been spent by the previous government on upgrading mobile coverage in 2008-9, nor in 2009-10, nor in 2010-11, nor in 2012-13. It was for those reasons, Mr Deputy Speaker, that we took to the last election a policy to spend $100 million on upgrading mobile coverage in outer metropolitan, regional and remote areas. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, the three mobile carriers, Telstra, Optus and Vodafone, obviously spend very substantial amounts of money each year on expanding their networks. That is as it should be. They are all private sector corporations, and they are all in the business of providing mobile telecommunication services to make a profit, and that is as it should be. But of course, ours is a very large country, Mr Deputy Speaker, and while they continue to expand their networks and put large amounts of money into expanding their networks every year, there are always going to be some areas where there is a case for providing mobile coverage, but areas where it is not likely that the particular location is going to meet the business case requirements of the carriers. And so the intention of this policy, Mr Deputy Speaker, is to, we estimate around 250 to 300 sites around the country, be in a position to provide a public subsidy so as to reduce the break-even point so that it does become economic for the mobile carriers to put base stations in and provide coverage. And so the important thing, Mr Deputy Speaker, is to make sure that through our allocation process we identify the areas of greatest need and that we direct the funding to the areas of greatest need so that for this $100 million of public money we can get the maximum possible benefit. Now, the first thing to say is that we intend to allocate the money through a competitive selection process. And the objective there is twofold. The first is, quite explicitly, we have said we intend to put pressure on the mobile carriers. We expect to leverage at least an equivalent amount of money out of the mobile carriers so that we expect at least an additional $100 million to be secured through the competitive selection process. But the second point about the competitive selection process, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that we need to make sure that we are identifying the areas of greatest need around the country, and the best way to do that is through a competitive selection process. So where we are at the moment is we are seeking community feedback. And to date we have had a large number of locations nominated through the process, locations where Australians are saying there is not mobile coverage here and there ought to be mobile coverage. Next, what we will do is go to a competitive selection process, and that is intended to be carried out in the second half of this year. In the first half of next year, we expect to be in a position to announce the locations which will be successful in securing funding, and we anticipate that the first base stations to be funded under this program will commence to roll out in the second half of next year. Funding was provided in this budget for this $100 million program over the next 4 years, and we expect that we will be in a position by the second half of next year to commence to roll out the initial base stations to be funded. Now, it's very important, Mr Deputy Speaker, to understand one of the key distinctions between the coalition's approach in this area and Labor's approach. Because let's just remember, Labor announced that they were going to spend $43 billion on a massive program that was going to solve every communications problem. And did they bother to check with rural and regional Australians as to what their priorities were? Evidently they did not, because I can tell you in the locations I've been to all around Australia consulting on this program, what people consistently say to me is what we heard from the previous government was this marvellous NBN that was going to fix everything, but they had nothing to say about mobile coverage. The previous government had nothing to say about mobile coverage, and yet that is what regional and rural Australians are saying is their priority. This government, this side of politics, has a proud record in regional and rural communications. People who reside outside the capital cities know who they can depend on to solve their communications needs.
Okay.